And this is what the apostle says. He says, this is how I make it through Corinth and all the sins and everything else going on. He says, I buffet my body. Paul had a secret. He was regularly knocking himself out. In this verse, in verse 27, the word discipline in New King James and the word beat in New International and the word buffet in NAS is the same Greek word. They're trying to capture an idea here. And that word is the Greek word that literally means to hit under the eye. It's a boxing term. It's a present active indicative, which is a long way of saying, I am constantly doing this. I am presently, ongoing, constantly doing this. So whenever you have a present that's in the present, active means aggressive me doing it, and indicative means it's ongoing. He says, I am constantly, actively enslaving my body after I hit myself under the eye. That's the word he uses. That's why you have discipline, beats, and buffet. It's the word hupiadzo. It's the word for hupoiadzo. It's under the eye. It's that place where the boxer would keep waiting for his defender to keep his hands out of the way, and he'd get in there and he'd bang him. It's either one of these or one of those, but the jar would knock him out. And Paul said this, I am constantly hitting myself under the eye, as in a knockout blow, and I am constantly enslaving my body. Why? What is this guy? A masochist? Is he some kind of weirdo? Is this what caused the Middle Ages? If you've ever heard of what the monks were doing in the Middle Ages, the most famous one was Simon Stylites. You ever heard of him? Probably wouldn't have. This guy lived at the top of a 30-foot high column for 40 years. He lived at the top in a space no bigger than half of his body. He could never lay flat. He always had to be curled up. He lived on top of that with his food once a day being pulled up by a rope and a little bit of water. He starved himself. He was emaciated. They said he prided himself that he had worms growing in his mouth, in his rotting and decaying teeth, and he was exposed to the climate. He was weathered. His body was just racked by the climate, and he lived up on that pole to show that he was buffeting his body. That is not at all what Paul had in mind. What he's saying is, you don't check out of the world, live on top of a pillar, and try and get as gross as possible. And by the way, Simon's fingernails, when he died, they said were over 18 inches long. I mean, he didn't take care of anything. He just existed on top of that pillar for 40 years in Egypt as a monk who was suffering and beating his body. This is not at all what Paul's talking about. Paul was saying, I am knocking out my bodily impulses to keep them from preventing me from the mission Christ bought and paid me to do on earth. He says, my cravings of my body want to derail me. When I go to witness in the Forum area of Corinth and I see all those naked people and I see them all running off in the bathhouses, I know what they're doing. I know all the immorality, and I'm not even going to dwell on that. And I'm not going to hang around there, and I'm not going to get into that. And he says, and when I go to the other people who are in the lust of the eyes and they have the most beautiful possessions, he says, I know that's not for me either, because I'm not going to let that derail me. And he says, when everyone starts talking about how great they are, I say, I'm not. I'm less than the least of all. Because I don't want to be deterred from what God called me to do, my mission. The question each of us needs to ask ourselves is, are we regularly hitting spiritually our flesh under the eye and saying, I'm not going to live by the lust of the eyes? I'm not going to live for stuff. I'm not going to spend my whole life, my whole earning life accumulating stuff so that when I get old, I have to find a place to download it all so my kids won't fight over it, and I have to guard it all until I do that, and I have to worry about it every time I leave. I'm not going to do that. But yet that's what our culture tells us we should do. The question each of us needs to ask ourselves is, are we living by the lust of the eyes? Sometimes it's the little acceptable sins that enslave us. This morning we saw that the lust in our lives that is allowed to grow unchecked in any of us will prevent us from crossing the finish line. Because look what Paul says. Look back at verse 27. The end of the verse. I discipline, I buffet, I beat my body, I enslave it lest when I have declared to everyone else the truth of God, I myself should become disqualified. Adokimos. It doesn't mean unsaved. Never has meant that. Never will. He isn't losing his salvation. He's saying, I want to win the prize for the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. I want to finish my course and do what He left me here on the earth to do. Not perfect, not sinless, but I want the direction of my life to be toward the goal, the prize, the upward call. And I don't want anything to derail me. I don't want to get distracted like Lot did. I don't want to get diverted. I don't want to get debilitated by my lust. I want to go toward what He called me to do. Because I want His well done at the end of my life. I want to be a good and faithful servant. I want to have Him pleased with my life. I don't want to have everybody else pleased. I want Him to be pleased. I don't want to be successful in everybody else's sight. I want to be successful in His sight. I don't want to measure my life by what I have. I want to measure my life by what will really be worthwhile if I lost every possession I have. Because that's your true wealth. Tonight, if you go home and all that's left is a smoldering ruins and everything in your business and home is burned up in ashes and gone, and your bank failed and all your investments failed, what you would have left is your real worth. Because it's not measured in God's sight in possessions. It's measured in who we're taking with us to heaven and what we've sent on ahead. And we send on ahead our money and our prayers and our devotion and our worship and our sacrifice, and we take people. And that's our true wealth. There are 3 areas that should concern all of us who seek Christ's full rewards in heaven. Here are the 3 areas the lusts of the eyes get us. Number 1, we should beware of the lust of the eyes that show up in the sins of old age. Remember we talked about youthful lust? Here's what old age comes with the lust of the eyes. At the time when we know most about the Lord, have the least to lose because our lives are nearly over, and when we have the most reason to seek heaven above all else, we begin to lust for comfort and convenience. Have you noticed that's one of the big lusts of older people? Comfort and convenience. They start gearing their life so they're kind of in the most comfortable nest they could possibly get in, and everything is convenient to them. I mean, they move where everything's conveniently located, so there's no, that's a lust in our culture. Comfort and convenience. We get greedy for recognition. Isn't it interesting? Often the older people get, the more they only give stuff if they recognize for it. They name the wing after them. They name this and the fellowship and the grant and the chair and everything else. Greed for recognition. And we grow in our covetousness for security. We want to be so secure. We want our money secure. We want our house secure. We want our medical care secure. We want our everything secure. Little kids don't even think about this stuff. The older you get, the more these come into place. This lust for comfort and convenience, this greed for recognition, and this covetousness for security. Don't waste your life, Paul says, especially the end of it. The sins of old age can erase Christ's well done. Remember Solomon. Solomon, who started out loving God, the biggest sacrifice anybody had ever made, and just loving God with all of his heart, he erased it all in his old age. Secondly, we should beware of the problem of exceptionism, I call it. It makes me think my life is an exception to God's will. I can excuse myself from doing anything for heaven because my past or my pain or my poverty or my poor self-image. And the problem of exceptionism is it can erase Christ's well done. Remember Ananias and Sapphira? Everybody else was giving, so they said they gave, but they really didn't. And they said, well, we're an exception. Everybody else was doing it, but we have to watch out for our future. And they hid and had this little conspiracy that they were going to act like they surrendered everything to the Lord, and they didn't. The problem of exceptionism. And we should also beware of the unmortified pockets of pride. Allowing these pockets to grow and not be dealt with can make me proud of my intellect or proud of my achievements or proud of my giftedness or even proud of my goodness. Pockets of pride in my life will erase Christ's well done. And we should remember that. Because Lot was very proud of who he got to run with, and very proud of his business. And he lusted, and he failed.